Page 142, Shalom Aleichem.
Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Asharei, Malachei Elyon, Mimelech, Malachei Amlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Bochem, Bochem Leshalom, Malachei Ashalom, Malachei Elyon, Mimelech, Malachei Amlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Bachuni Leshalom, Malachei Ashalom, Malachei Elyon, Mimelech, Malachei Amlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Tzeitkhem, Tzeitkhem Leshalom, Malachei Ashalom, Malachei Elyon, Mimelech, Malachei Amlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
Shabbat Shalom. So tonight, of course, is Shabbos, but it's a very special evening in our community as well as we celebrate our teacher, our scholar, and our friend, Chris Friedrichs. Chris will speak later during our service. Normally when Chris speaks, it's like 3 in the afternoon on Yom Kippur, and we're all hungry and kvetchy and the whole thing. And so expect a little more patience this evening from your audience, Chris. I think we're those that were able to be at the dinner beforehand were satiated not only in food but in spirit as well, as we got to hear from Chris's 3 children. And so we want to invite them to come up this evening to lead us in a brief reading and then the lighting of the Shabbos candles. Ellen, Jeremy, and Jonathan, if you would please.
As these Shabbat candles give light to all who behold them, so may we, by our lives, give light to all who behold us. As their brightness reminds us of the generations of Israel who have kindled light, so may we, in our own day, be among those who kindle light.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu להדליק נר של Shabbat. Thank you. So we're going to do a shorter version of Kabbalat Shabbat than we normally would. We're going to start with Psalm 98, page 134. You'll see at the top of the page just those two lines starting with Zamru Ladonai, singing praise to Adonai. How wonderful it is that we are all together filling the sanctuary with our bodies, our presence, and bringing some joy into Shabbat. Zameru l'Adonai bechinor, bechinor v'kol zimra. Zameru l'Adonai bechinor, bechinor v'kol zimra. Zameru, zamru l'Adonai, zameru. Page 138, Lecha Dodi. Oh, Lecha Dodi, likrat kala, nei Shabbat nekavela. Oh, Lecha Dodi, likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekavela. Shamor וזכור בדיבור אחד, השמיענו אל המיוחד. אדוני אחד ושמו אחד, לשמו תפארת ולתפילה. ולך דודי לקראת קלה, בני שבת נקבלה. ולך דודי לקראת קלה, בני שבת נקבלה. Verse 2. לקראת שבת לכו בנלכה, כי היא מקור הברכה. מראש מקדם נסוכה, סוף מעשה במחשבה תחילה. ולך דודי לקראת קלה, בני שבת נקבלה. ולך דודי
door to greet the Sabbath bride.
Boi v'shalom, ateret bala, gam besimcha u'betola, toch emunei am segula, boi chala, all together.
Remain standing, page 263, Chatzi Kaddish.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, ועלמא דברה חירותי וימליך מלכותי, בחייכון וביומכון, ובחיי דכל בית ישראל, בגלה בגלה, ובזמן קריב ויאמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך, לעלם ולעלמי המיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל, שמי דקודשא בריחו לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, דמירן מעמה יאמרו אמן. ברכו את אדוני המבורך.
ברוך אדוני המבורך לעולם ועד.
ברוך אדוני המבורך לעולם ועד.
Please be seated. Page 265, we read together, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bidvaro ma'ariv aravim, b'chokhmah poteach she'arim, u'vitvuna meshane itim, u'machalif et hazmanim, u'mesader et hakochavim b'mishmerotehem barakia kirtzono, borei yom v'layla, golel or mipnei choshech, v'choshech mipnei or. ומעביר יום ומביא לילה, ומבדיל בין יום ובין לילה, אדוני צבאות שמו.
אל חי וקיים, תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד, ברוך אתה אדוני, המעריב ערבים. אהבת עולם בית ישראל, עמך תורה ומצוות, חוקים ומשפטים, אותנו לימדת. על כן אדוני אלוהינו, משלנו וקומנו, נשיח בחוקך, ונשמח בדברי תורתך, ובמצוותיך, לעולם לעולם ועד. כי הם חיינו ואורך ימינו, ובהם נגה יומם ולילה, באהבתך אל תסיר ממנו לעולמים. ברוך אתה אדוני, אוהב עמו ישראל. שמע ישראל, אדוני אלוהינו, אדוני אחד. ברוך שם כבוד מלכותו לעולם ועד. ואהבת את אדוני בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובישעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם אלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם אמת.
We'll turn to page 70 and sing together the song of freedom, Mi Chamocha.
מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נהדר בקודש, נורא תהילות אוסף אלה, נורא תהילות אוסף אלה, מלכותך ראו בניך, בוקע ים לפני משה ומרים, זה לינו ואמרו, אדוני ימלוך, אדוני ימלוך, לעולם ועד. ונאמר, כי בד אדוני את יעקב, וגאלו מיד חזק ממנו, ברוך אתה אדוני, גל ישראל.
Amen.
השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום, לשלום, והעמידנו שומרנו לחיים, ופרוס עלינו סוכת שלומך, ופרוס עלינו סוכת שלומך. אמן. ברוך אתה אדוני, הפורס סוכת שלום, עלינו ועל כל עמו ישראל, ועל ירושלים.
Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel wrote about Shabbat as being a palace, a sanctuary in time. And I think about both those important images of Shabbat and sanctuary as going together so very powerfully, especially right now in the Jewish world. It is one thing to have Shabbat, to be able to breathe, to be able to rest, to be able to shut out and insulate a little bit from all of the cacophony around us that is so painful. But it is that metaphor of a sanctuary that I think is the most powerful to me. I mentioned this last night in the Israel dialogue groups, that I keep feeling more and more each week as the temperature seems to rise around us, that this sanctuary feels like a sanctuary. And to be here in this space together in such a large and beautiful congregation tonight, it really fills and feels in the soul. So let's join together in Vishamru, page 272.
ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. ביני ובין בני ישראל, ביני ובין בני ישראל, ביני ובין בני ישראל, אותי לעולם. Yam b'rai rai rai, Shabbat, Shabbat, Yam b'rai rai rai, Shabbat, Shabbat, Yam b'rai rai rai, Shabbat, 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 Shalom. Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai et hashamayim v'et haaretz ubayom hashvi'i Shabbat vayinafash, Shabbat vayinafash. Yam b'rai rai rai, Shabbat, Shabbat, Yam b'rai rai rai, Shabbat, Shabbat, Yam b'rai rai rai, Shabbat, 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 Shalom.
We rise for the Amidah, beginning page 273.
Adonai Sfatai Tiftach, Adonai Sfatai Tiftach, Ufi Yagid Tehilatecha, Ufi Yagid Tehilatecha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu, Elohei Avotenu ve'imoteinu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Ha'el HaGadol, HaGibor ve'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, Ve'koneh HaKol, וזוכר חסי אבות ואימהות, ומביא גאולה לבני בניהם, למען שמו באהבה. מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן, ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם ועזרת שרה. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיה מתים מטריו להושיע. משיב הרוח ומוריד הגשם, מחכל חיים בחסד, מחיי מתים ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ברופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר. מי כמוך בגבורות ומי דומה לך, מלך ממית ומחיה ומצמיח ישועה, נאמן אתה לחיות מתים, ברוך אתה אדוני מחיי המתים. אתה קדוש ושמך קדוש, וקדושים בכל יום יללוך סלה. ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש.
Amen. We continue with the rest of the Amidah silently, beginning on page 277, or of course the prayer of your own heart.
Ihu leratzon imeifi Egion libi lefanecha Adonai tzuri Adonai tzuri vegoali
We turn now to page 371. In the middle of the page, we're going to offer a mishaberach, a prayer for healing. So many loved ones in our community who are in need of healing of both body and of soul, and we think of them. In particular, we mention the names of Yoel Robin's Paradise, Sarah Chiachi, Virginia Kozicki, Frederick Fajardo, Marina, Pearl Feldman, Karen Bernstein, Esther Brower, Max Konybauer, Shannon Wall, Itamar Ben-Root, Reuven Pinchas Ben-Zara, Marilyn Perrin, Adele, Miriam, Virginia Edwards, Nini Rostaker-Shipman, Yeshayahu, Natalie Wormelli, Phoebe Kahn, Claire Columbia, Carla Zivet, Janet Gelb, David Shlomo Gorney, and Andrea Yarzbiak. And I invite you, if there are other people you're thinking of, if you'd like to include their names, to rise or raise your hands so that we can add them as well.
May thy source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Mi sheberach imotenu mekor habracha lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen.
Shabbat Shalom. So just to share with you, firstly, some brief announcements before we introduce Chris and hear his words this evening. First of all, thank you again to everyone that made this weekend possible, or this evening possible, our wonderful committee that helped plan things, our incredible office staff that helped hold all these pieces together, and to all of you that showed up. Really, we could plan it, but if you didn't come, we wouldn't fill the place with so much love and so much warmth for our teacher and for our congregation. So thank you all for being here. A reminder that as we do every Sunday at 2 o'clock this Sunday at the Art Gallery is our weekly rally. God willing, 1 week soon, God willing. We won't need to do these anymore, but the rally to bring them all home, and that's at 2 o'clock at the Art Gallery on Sunday. On Wednesday, March 20th at 7 o'clock here at Temple Sholom, in a program that is open for the entire community and co-sponsored with Federation and Rav and CIJA. We are pleased to welcome back our scholar in residence, Yossi Klein Halevi, who will be providing a community briefing on all the goings-on in Israel. Yossi spoke during the High Holy Days. We've done some webinars with him, and we've already expecting over 300 people. So please, if you do come, come early so that you can find seats and parking. Purim is coming, and boy, do we need some laughter and some joy. And so join us on Saturday, March 23rd for our Purim Barbie Beach Bash. It is what it sounds like. And so come for the Megillah reading and the Purim spiel. That's at 5:30, and that's going to be followed by a Purim carnival around 6:15 or so. Our sisterhood on March 24th has Vashti's Banquet, which is at 6 o'clock at East is East Restaurant. And then lastly, and then beyond this, we won't go too far, our Sholom Shishim, our seniors, they have their monthly lunch, the Society of Crows with Dr. Robert Butler, and that's going to be on Tuesday, March 26th at noon. There will not be a test on all of these. The last thing I will say, though, is that Pesach is coming, and there will be, if it hasn't come out yet, a sign-up sheet for our congregational seders. We offer 2 sederim, one for families, one for adults, but also every year we get requests from members of the congregation and community that are looking for a place for Seder. So if you have an extra seat or 2 at your home, at your Seder, if you could let our office know, we can try to match people up as those requests come in. And if you're looking for a place for Seder, again, we'll send out an email about this, but please don't hesitate to contact the office. I inherited many wonderful things when I came to this congregation almost 11 years ago now. All of them from Rabbi and Kathy Bregman and from the leadership of the congregation, and chief among them was the privilege to, well, one was not have to plan a Yom Kippur afternoon program. That was nice. As rabbi, you're like, what do we do Yom Kippur afternoon? They're so hungry. There's all this time. How do you fill the time? But to have the legacy of Chris Friedrichs, and at that time of blessed memory, Rhoda Friedrichs, to be teachers in this congregation, and to hear every year how Chris had really helped the congregation in that moment on Yom Kippur, but even beyond that, throughout all of his teaching, to try to make sense in a present-day context of history that now, in this moment, feels all too present tense. But through the lens of history and the connections that Chris makes throughout those lectures, to find new insights into something that, for me at least, had become to the point of me needing to turn away, because the Holocaust had just become so painful and so traumatic. But in each year, rather than traumatizing me, Chris, and I think for our congregation, you actually enlightened us and inspired us and gave us a glimmer of hope, even in the midst of the ashes of the Shoah. And that is an incredible gift, so that we can be allowed to re-engage with that story in a way that continues to inform us for generations to come, so that we never forget and that it never happens again. None of that would have been possible had Rabbi Bregman and Chris not come up with this plan years before that. And so I want to invite our Rabbi Emeritus, Rabbi Philip Bregman, to come and say a few words before Chris delivers his Devar Torah this evening. Rabbi Bregman.
First of all, what a pleasure to see the New Yorkers. Rabbis have different categories of B'nai Mitzvah. Your family, tallest B'nai Mitzvah I've ever had. Now that's both relative and real. And a pleasure, really, to see you. As you'll perhaps see in the book, it was 2004. I was looking for something different that was going to be, instead of the Ela Eskara, the martyrology section, in which we read sometimes very graphically how various rabbis were slaughtered over history. And I thought it was time perhaps to upgrade or to take a look at history, but through a different lens in this period of martyrology, not stopping with what the Machzor had done, but give some additional insight. And it was with that in mind that I went to one of the wonderful resources that we had in the synagogue in 2004. And that, of course, was you, Chris. To come and to talk and to share, and it was such a successful drush that the next year, and I said, and new? And the rest is history. And continued on, and grateful that Rabbi Moskowitz decided, let's continue. We got a good thing going here. Let's keep it going. There was always a subtext in which you were teaching us. Not only to know the history, and boy, learning history today is not the easiest thing in the world. I don't know if you and Richard and Greg are the last true historians left at UBC without it turning into a complete circus and farce. But you always had that subtext, and the subtext was, you know, my dear friends, this can happen again. I want to read the final paragraph of your drush that you delivered 13 days before October 7th. But the number of these survivors naturally declines year after year, and inevitably the time will come when there will be none at all. Their stories will not have died with them, but the personal impact will never be there again. And that is a source of great concern to all who believe that the future generations, Jewish and non-Jewish alike, must continue to learn of the Holocaust and its lessons. The Shoah will never be forgotten. Jews are a history-minded people, and we will make sure of that. But what will ensure that the Shoah will continue to resonate to future generations and as an event that must continue to give warning of the depths to which humanity can descend if we do not continue to do everything in our power to preserve a belief in the value of all of God's children, Jews and non-Jews alike. That is surely the fundamental challenge we all face when we contemplate the future of the Shoah. Written 13 days before October 7th. A prophet, no doubt. The subtext was clear and is true. But here we are. We will not die. We will go forward because of instructors and teachers like you.
Thank you, Rabbi Bregman. Our rabbis teach, Aseh lecha rab v'koneh lecha haver. Acquire for yourself a teacher, and you will find for yourself a friend. Chris, you are our teacher, and with so many in this congregation, and I include myself among them, you are a dear friend. It is a pleasure to add to the incredible contribution that you have made to learning in our community and in the whole world, Jewish and beyond, this new anthology, this collection of your 20 years of Divrei Torah, of your lectures on the Shoah, called Reflections on the Shoah. Those that ordered copies of the book, it's available in our social hall afterwards. If you would still like one, we don't take money on Shabbos, but we'll take your name, and we know where you live. Quite literally, actually. Chris, it has been my true pleasure to work with you on producing this volume. I want to thank Richard Mankus for suggesting the idea. Now I think 6-7 years ago. Things take time. I got to read every single one of your lectures as we laid this out and figured it out. And I got to sit with you over your shoulder and sometimes you over mine as we worried over paragraph spacing and commas and all of those things. Your attention to detail. They say if God is in the details, well, Chris, you brought holiness to this work. Our friend and our teacher, Chris Friedrichs.
Well, I'm quite overwhelmed about things that have been said tonight, but I'm happy to have a chance to speak about what I'm hoping to talk about tonight. I should begin by saying that I am not going to talk about the Shoah, because I have done that 20 times, and what I feel I wanted to share with the congregation is indeed in this book, pretty much word for word, as I said it at the time. Anyway, it's always appropriate to begin a drosh with some reference to the parashah or the haftarah for this Sabbath. So I want to begin by mentioning that the portion that will be read tomorrow, Pekudei, has to do with the building of the tabernacle of the tent of meeting in the desert. And the haftarah has to do with the construction of the temple. And I will indeed be talking tonight about a temple, not the great temple of Solomon in Jerusalem, but about a more modern one, namely our own Temple Sholom. Temple Sholom is a building, of course, but much more importantly, Temple Sholom is our congregation, our holy community. And that is what I plan to speak about. Before, however, in light of what is happening this evening, for which I'm really, truly grateful, I think it's appropriate for me to first say something quite personal in telling the story of the pathway by which I became a member of Temple Sholom. I think the screens are going to appear, and there was some images there. The image you see is something we'll talk about for just a moment. When I was growing up in New Rochelle, New York, there was a small but beautiful painting in the dining room of our home. It was a portrait of my mother's great-grandfather, Rabbi Solomon Herxheimer. That portrait now hangs in the living room of my house on West 23rd Avenue, and some of you have seen it there. Rabbi Herxheimer was one of the founders of Reform Judaism in 19th century Germany, and my siblings and I were often told that he was a pioneer in introducing the practice of confirmation for girls. The idea of a bat mitzvah was still much too radical for his generation. But Rabbi Herxheimer believed in the importance of Jewish education for both boys and girls. And he felt that girls should also have an event at which they too could show what they had learned. My mother was deeply proud of her Jewish ancestry and of this particular ancestor who was a pioneer of Jewish education. But while we were made very aware of our maternal Jewish heritage, my siblings and I did not actually receive a Jewish education. My parents were both refugees from Nazi Germany. And I think those of you, I know that those of you who were with us for the dinner heard something of this story from my son. My parents were both refugees from Nazi Germany, but only my mother was Jewish. My father was not. And although we were raised with this very strong respect for our Jewish heritage, we were not raised in a Jewish way. My parents were wise and wonderful human beings whose memory I venerate in every possible way. but for my own transformation from a person with a Jewish mother to a person living a Jewish life, I must thank two different people. The first is my wife, Rhoda, whose 10th yahrzeit my kids and I will mark this summer. Rhoda's parents were also refugees from Nazi Germany. But in her case, both of her parents were Jewish, and she received a thoroughly Jewish upbringing with a good command of Hebrew and a deep knowledge of Jewish history and tradition. Through my marriage with Rhoda, I was slowly drawn into an ever deeper engagement with Jewish life, and for that I remain deeply grateful. The second person I have to thank is someone you all know and who indeed has honored me by speaking here just a few moments ago. Not long after Rhoda and I moved to Vancouver, Rhoda took the initiative in deciding which congregation we should join. She did a little of that familiar synagogue shopping that people do when they move to a new community. But it didn't take long to know that Temple Sholom would be the right place for us. And just a few months after we joined Temple Sholom, somebody else did too. Our new rabbi, Rabbi Philip Bregman. And I want to express my deep appreciation to Rabbi Bregman for the role he played in shaping my belated Jewish education and guiding me into an ever richer understanding of and participation in Jewish life. Of course, once you belong to a congregation, you often start doing things. Since I am a historian and a teacher, I soon got involved in our temple's adult education program, as well as other events in which I could draw on my special interest in German Jewish history and my involvement in Holocaust awareness education. But something else happened. In those days, we had only one rabbi. And energetic and dedicated as he was, even Rabbi Bregman sometimes needed a vacation. On those occasions, some of our very knowledgeable lay members would conduct the services. And while that was something I was not equipped to do, as a teacher, I could manage to prepare and deliver a sermon, and I was occasionally asked to do so. Thank you, Jean Angus, for asking me. My sermons dealt with various topics, but I always found it particularly interesting to delve into the Torah portion or the Haftarah for the week and find some themes that I could discuss. In 2004, however, and you already heard about this, I received an unexpected request from Rabbi Bregman. As you just heard, he asked me to give a drosh on the afternoon of Yom Kippur during that part of the service devoted to the memory of those who had been murdered over the centuries because they were Jewish. And he also asked me specifically to focus on the Shoah and its victims, as well as the complexity of Jews' relationships to Germany, the country that had caused the Shoah, and also the country whose history I had been devoting a lot of my time to studying and had been staying at great lengths in Germany to do so. What began as an experiment somehow turned into a tradition. And last year, as giving such a drosh 20 times, it was time for me to retire from this tradition. Though not, I truly hope, retire from giving other kinds of talks or sermons at Temple Sholom. Meanwhile, and you heard this too, something else happened. A few years ago, my dear friend and colleague, Professor Richard Menkes, approached our rabbis with a suggestion. Although Richard, as you know, is not a member of our shul, he is very well known to very many members of our congregation, either as a personal friend or in his capacity as one of Canada's most eminent experts in the history of Canadian Jewish history. It was, in fact, Richard who proposed to Rabbi Moskowitz and Rabbi Brown that perhaps the temple might wish to publish a compendium of my Yom Kippur sermons. They agreed to this idea, and so did I. I want to mention that Rabbi Dan has truly been a driving force in making this publication happen. And I should add that right from the beginning, Rabbi Dan proposed that the cover of this book should show an image of the beautiful and moving Holocaust memorial in our temple garden. I instantly agreed with this suggestion. And while the words in this book are almost all by me, this powerfully evocative cover design using a photo by Marielle Solan was created by our rabbi. But everything I've said so far is really part of a larger topic. For this book is also a product of something much larger than me. It is a product of Temple Sholom. And that is what I would like to talk about now. For Temple Sholom is not just a congregation. It is also a community. It is a community that we who belong to Temple Sholom are very fortunate to belong to. Now, I know that many of you tonight are not members of our shul, and of course, we warmly welcome you here in our midst, and I'm very pleased to see so many who are not, in fact, members of Temple Sholom. But you will appreciate why I am primarily addressing what I will now say to my fellow congregants. Many decades ago, I found myself in Los Angeles. Not quite found myself, I was there for a conference. And I was there for a few days, staying near the campus of UCLA. And on the Friday of that week, I decided to go to the evening service at some shul. And even in those pre-Google days, I was able to locate the nearest Reform synagogue, Temple Emmanuel. Of course, over the years, almost all of us have attended services at various synagogues of various denominations, other Reform shuls, conservative, Orthodox, Jewish, renewal, or whatever. Much of what takes place in those services is always familiar to us from the shul maybe we most frequently attend. But while that is so, some of what we experience there is, of course, not so familiar. But certainly, it can be especially comforting to join a service where so much of what takes place follows a pattern that we are used to. At Temple Emmanuel, as a Reform shul, I enjoyed holding in my hands the familiar siddur we used in those days. Many of us will remember the gates of prayer. But there was more. By chance, it was a service during which various women who had performed notable volunteer services for the congregation over the past year were being honored that evening. And as I sat there listening to the rabbi read the citations describing each woman's contribution to the congregation, I remember thinking, oh, that woman is this congregation's Sarah Chachi. Or, oh, this woman is their Lenore Etkin. Or, music, there's the Joyce Cherry. And right on down the line. I felt very much at home. So yes, congregations have much in common. and Reform congregations have particularly much in common with each other. But at the same time, each congregation is unique, and that applies most expressly to Temple Sholom, for it was, and in some ways still is, shaped by an experience which I believe no other Reformed congregation in Canada has had to face. In January of 1985, our small but comfortable synagogue building on West 10th Avenue was completely destroyed in a matter of hours by a malicious anti-Semitic firebombing. Suddenly, we had no home. For 3.5 years, we were in the wilderness, worshiping at the JCC, educating our children in spare classrooms at Talmud Torah, using one temporary space after another as the temple office, anxiously trying to raise funds for a new building and find a site for it and get it designed and constructed, and never quite sure whether all the pieces would fall into place for us to have a new home. Yet during those 3.5 years, our congregation remained together. What we shared was much more important than what we had lost. And eventually, the building in which we are worshiping tonight was completed, and we could move from our temporary tents of meeting to this beautiful home for our congregation. For thousands of years, Jews have recounted the story of our ancestors wandering in the wilderness for 40 years until they reached their destination. By the time they got there, the generation that still recalled Egypt was largely gone. We, fortunately, still have many members of our shul who recall our synagogue on West 10th, not to mention a few, such as Arthur and Glenda, whom I have seen here earlier this evening, Arthur and Glenda Gutman, who remember the years of Temple Sholom before that building was acquired. Eventually, of course, in the fullness of time, there will be none who remember those days. But I hope the heroic story of how Temple Sholom managed to remain a strong and united congregation during our 3.5 stressful years in the wilderness will long be told and remembered by our congregation. It is part of our history and should never be forgotten. Different people played many different roles in sustaining our unity and commitment during those wilderness years. But all this should make us reflect more generally on the way that different members play different roles in any congregation. We have been exceptionally fortunate over the last 45 years in our rabbinical and cantorial leadership. And we have had very effective presidents, many of whom are here this evening. We've had immensely dedicated educators and a hard-working and caring temple staff, not only in the office, but also the people who help keep our building safe and the people who make it tidy and clean every time we've been worshiping here. But congregations, despite all these people whose jobs are to do those things, congregations get most of their strength from their members. And that means all of their members. Of course, there are people whose volunteer efforts are particularly noticed, and I am truly deeply moved tonight to be regarded as one of them. But there are many, many other members as well, and every single one plays an important role. Obviously, worship is one of the main activities of Temple Sholom. Many people often attend services on Friday evening, or as I myself more frequently do, on the morning of Shabbat. But many more of our members attend services only occasionally, especially on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. I am sure that many of us have looked around at the hundreds of unfamiliar faces surrounding us at Kol Nidre and wondered who all those people are. Well, they are us. A congregation like ours serves the needs of different members in different ways. For some, attending an act of worship just a few times a year may be sufficient to express their Jewish commitment. But if they have children, they are sending them to our religious school. If there is a yahrzeit, they come here to honor a beloved family member. If there is a program that catches their interest, they attend that event. And of course, they are paying their share of the temple dues. And by doing so, they are making an indispensable contribution to supporting all of the different ways in which a congregation serves the different needs of its members and the Jewish community as a whole. A congregation is in itself a community, but it is embedded within the larger community to which we all belong. There are many congregations within that larger Jewish community in Vancouver, and there are numerous Jewish organizations that address the remarkably wide range of needs and interests of Jewish individuals and families in this corner of Canada. I could mention many of them, but in fact, I will mention only one. My three children, Ellen, Jonathan, and Jeremy, who spoke beautifully just a few hours ago at the dinner, they grew up in this congregation, and they had their bat or bar mitzvah right on this bima. But they also belong to the Habanim Dror Youth Organization and attended Camp Miriam. Now, I myself have been to Camp Miriam only once, and in fact, only after my kids had grown up. From the way my own children and their friends had enthused about this magical place on Gabriola Island, I had always assumed it was an enormous paradise of spacious meadows and extensive playing fields. It is not. It is actually quite small. But it was and is a paradise of activities and experiences for Jewish children and teenagers, and above all, it is a place where young Jews form lifelong friendships. All of my children formed friendships like that, and many of their friends are, in fact, here this evening. But back to Temple Sholom. It has been a challenge, but also a privilege for me to address this congregation for 20 years in a row when we turned our attention on our holiest day to the greatest tragedy that has befallen the Jewish people in the last 2 millennia. I feel deeply honored that my words have been considered worth preserving in the form of this book, which some of you are holding in your hands and others will also be receiving a little later this evening. Now, obviously, like any author, I hope people will read it. Some people read a book like this from beginning to end. Some others will select some sermons whose titles engage their interest and read those first. People who attended those sermons may find it interesting to revisit and recall what I said at that time. Some people who are not members of our shul, and I know there are some, but without being members of our shul, are deeply interested in the history and implications of the Shoah, they may find some passages or sections that help them reflect on this eternally painful subject. And then there are those who will simply put the book on their shelf as an expression of their relationship to Temple Sholom. For them, this little emblem of Temple Shalom on the spine and on the back cover may be the most important thing about this book. And that is okay, for it is an expression of their solidarity with our congregation. There are, after all, many, many different ways to be a member of this holy community. It is not easy to be Jewish. And these days, for a number of reasons, it is more difficult than it has been for quite a long time. But a congregation like this can give us a sense of belonging and support. All of us who are members of Temple Shalom know that we are very fortunate indeed. And certainly this evening, I myself have every reason to feel that way. And I simply want to close by expressing my heartfelt thanks to all of you. Toda Rabbah and Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you so much, Chris. I want to acknowledge Ezra Shankin, who's here as well from the Jewish Federation, Abby Herlin, who's here from the Vancouver Holocaust Education Center, and so many that have come out, as Chris mentioned, from across our community to celebrate you, Chris, and to celebrate this moment for our congregation. We're going to continue so that we can conclude. We'll rise, page 586 for Elena.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצא בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא, שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוסר ארץ, ומושב יקרו בשמיים ממעל, ושכינתו זו בגובהי מרומים, הוא אלוהינו אין עוד, אמת מלכנו אפס זולתו, ככתוב בתורתו, וידעת היום בהשבות אל לבבך, כי אדוני הוא האלוהים בשמיים ממעל, ועל הארץ מתחת, אין עוד ונאמר, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ. ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד.
Turn now to a reading before the Mourner's Kaddish on page 595. Yesh kochavim. There are stars up above, so far away we only see their light, long, long after the star itself is gone. And so it is with people that we loved. Their memories keep shining ever brightly, though their time with us is done. But the stars that light up the darkest night, these are the lights that guide us. As we live our days, these are the ways we remember. We'll turn to page 598 now for Kaddish Yatom, the Mourner's Kaddish, and invite, as I share the names aloud of those for whom we mark Shloshim and Yartzeit, if you would stand as I read the name of your loved one. We are in Shloshim for Baz Edmeades. And we mark yahrzeit this week of Shayla Atnikov, Aaron David Tchaikovsky, Ann Erkey, Bernard Geffen, Fanny Gordon, Mel Hain, Jerry Halpern, Max Hansen, Louis Kahn, Colin Lang, Sharona Levitan, Hendrika Lugman Daly, George Minuk, Sandra Nyberg, Irving Ornstein, Madeline Panoff, Iz Paskoff, Paul Pincus, Anne Raisin, Arthur Rosenfeld, Alan Patrick Rostiker, Ali Shanti, Nathaniel Shapira, Max Singer, and Hilda Stern. If there are others who have come to say Kaddish, if you would stand and share the name of your loved one at this time. We stand together now as one congregation beside all of those who mourn. Join with the mourners, those who choose, on page 598. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei Rabbah, be'alma divra chirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chaye echon uvyom echon uv'chaye chol beit Yisrael, ba'agala v'zman kari v'imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevorach le'alam u'lalmei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei dekudsha barichu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, da'amiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'al kol yoshvei tevel, v'imru amen. Zichronam livracha, may their memories always be a blessing. Amen. So we want to invite our cantor emeritus, Arthur Gutman, to join us in front to lead us in Kiddush and Hamotzi.
Give me a mic and watch out. Chris, you, Joyce Cherry, and Eric Wilson all took part in services in various ways on Yom Kippur. And together with Rabbi Bregman, for the 19 years I stood on this bima, it was an honor. You did one thing you did not mention. You gave me such inspiration. You gave me the strength that we all needed at that time in the afternoon to be able to complete the service and to do it with emotion, with feeling, and with power. And I thank you with all my heart for that. Vayher vayboker yom hashishi, vaychulu hashamayim v'haaretz v'chol tzivam, vaychal Elohim bayom hashvihi melachto asher asa, vayishbot bayom hashvihi mikol melachto asher asa. Vayivorech Elohim et yom hashvihi vayikadesh oto, ki bo shavat mikol malachto asher bara Elohim lasot. Savri.
Aye.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. Please join with me. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav b'ratzavanu ושבת קודשו באהבה וברצון הנחילנו, זיכרון למעשה בראשית, כי הוא יום תחילה למקראי קודש, זכר לציאת מצרים. כי בנו בחרת ואותנו קידשת מכל העמים, ושבת קודשך באהבה וברצון הנחלתנו. ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש השבת. That's a congregation. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen. B'te'avon, everyone. And
Te'avon. We'll conclude on page 625. Adon olam asher malach b'terem kol yetzir nivra ve'nasa v'chefzo kol azay melech shemo nikra ve'acharei kichlot hakol levado yimloch nora ve'hu haya ve'hu hoveh ve'hu yeh betifara ve'hu echad ve'en sheni lehamshilo le'achbira ve'li reshit ve'li tachlit ve'lo ha'oz ve'ha'misra ve'hu eli ve'chai go'ali ve'tzur chevli ve'etzana ve'hu nisi umanos li menat posi ve'yom ekra ve'yado avtit ruchi ve'tisha ve'ayira ve'im ruchi geviati Adonai li
ve'lo ira.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.